The day I realized a construction company had decided my property line was more of a suggestion than an actual legal boundary, I came home expecting nothing more exciting than reheated leftovers and an evening on the porch. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and nearly drove straight into a dump truck sitting where my fence used to be. Not beside my fence. Not near my fence. Exactly where 40 feet of it had stood that very morning. For a second, I honestly thought I was at the wrong house, because there was no way anybody could be arrogant enough to tear down part of a private homeowner's fence without even making a phone call first. Turns out, I was about to learn there was absolutely no limit to some people's arrogance. My name is Ethan Harper, and until all this happened, my life in Cedar Grove, Ohio, was about as quiet as a town can get. My house sat on Willow Lane, a weathered two-story place built by my great-grandfather back in 1932. Every scratch in the floorboards, every crooked doorway, every old nail hidden inside those walls carried a story. My grandfather grew up there. My father grew up there. And after both of them passed, I stayed. Some people saw an old house. I saw nearly a century of family history. Behind my property sat a large commercial lot that had spent decades doing absolutely nothing. Kids used to cut through it on bicycles. Stray cats ruled the place like tiny furry dictators. Most summers it looked like a jungle of weeds and forgotten dreams. Then one spring, everything changed. A development company called Horizon Urban Partners bought the land. Within weeks, surveyors appeared. Then engineers. Then heavy equipment. Before long, giant signs announced plans for a 4-story mixed-use development with upscale apartments, retail space, underground parking, and all the modern buzzwords developers love to throw around whenever they're trying to convince everyone they're improving the neighborhood. To be fair, I wasn't automatically against it. Progress happens. Cities grow. Empty lots become something else. That's life. My only concern was simple. Respect my property. That's it. A few days before construction officially began, I met the site supervisor. His name was Trevor Kane. He was the kind of guy who managed to look annoyed even when nobody was talking to him. Expensive sunglasses. Expensive truck. Expensive watch. The sort of man who carried himself like every conversation was wasting his valuable time. He walked over while I was trimming hedges and introduced himself. We exchanged a few polite words. Then I said, "Listen, I know construction gets messy. I can deal with noise. I can deal with traffic. Just make sure your crews stay off my property." He barely glanced toward my fence. "Won't be a problem," he said. "We've got everything mapped out." The way he said it bothered me. Not the words themselves. The tone. Like someone humoring a child. Still, I let it go. Maybe I was being overly protective. Maybe I was just attached to that old house. For the next few weeks, construction rolled forward. Excavators arrived. Concrete trucks rumbled down the street before sunrise. Neighbors complained on social media. Life went on. Then came the afternoon, everything exploded. I had spent the day helping a friend repair a roof across town. I was tired, sunburned, and looking forward to a cold drink. As soon as I turned onto Willow Lane, something felt wrong. The view looked different. Open. Exposed. Then I saw it. Nearly 40 feet of my cedar fence had vanished. Gone. Completely gone. My stomach dropped. Beyond the missing fence, workers moved equipment through the opening as casually as if it belonged there. One man pushed a wheelbarrow directly across my grass. Another walked between my garage and shed carrying tools. Tire tracks cut through part of my yard. I just sat in my truck staring. You know those moments when your brain refuses to process what's in front of you because reality suddenly makes no sense? That was me. Eventually I got out and walked toward the construction site. Every step made me angrier. Not because of the fence itself. What can be replaced? What bothered me was the assumption behind it. Nobody asked. Nobody notified me. Nobody even pretended to care. They simply decided my property was convenient and acted accordingly. I found Trevor standing near a trailer reviewing blueprints with 2 foremen. "Where's my fence?" I asked. He looked up briefly. "What? My fence?" "The one your crews tore down." He glanced toward the opening and shrugged. Actually shrugged. "Oh, we needed temporary access for equipment." For a second I thought I had misheard him. "You demolished private property because it was convenient?" He rolled up the plans. "Relax. We'll put something back when the project's done." The casual dismissal hit harder than the damage itself. I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. "That's not your decision to make." Trevor sighed dramatically. as though I was creating an inconvenience for him. Look, we're on a schedule. Everybody's making sacrifices while this gets built. Then he turned away. And right there, standing in the dust beside a hole where my family's fence had stood for decades, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake they intended to fix. It was something much worse. Trevor honestly believed there would be no consequences for what he'd done. What neither of us knew at that moment was that the missing fence had just revealed something he desperately didn't want me to see. What Trevor didn't realize was that tearing down my fence had accidentally given me the best view of his entire operation. Before that day, the cedar boards had blocked most of the construction area from my property. Now there was nothing separating my yard from the excavation zone except open air, and as angry as I was, curiosity got the better of me. The next morning before work, I stood near the gap with a cup of coffee and watched the site come alive. Trucks rolled in before sunrise. Excavators moved dirt. Workers carried materials back and forth. At first all I saw was organized chaos, but after about 20 minutes something started bothering me. The equipment wasn't just passing near my property line. It was crossing it. Repeatedly. I walked back into the garage and dug out the property survey my father had kept in an old filing cabinet. A few years earlier, I'd had the boundaries professionally confirmed when replacing part of the roof, so I knew the documents were accurate. That afternoon, I compared the survey to what I was seeing outside. Then I measured. Then I measured again because I honestly couldn't believe what I was finding. The construction company hadn't merely removed my fence. They had incorporated a strip of my land directly into their access route. Nearly 6 feet of private property had effectively become part of the job site. Every dump truck, every excavator, every delivery vehicle was trespassing multiple times a day. The more I watched, the clearer it became. They hadn't knocked down my fence because it was in the way. They had knocked it down because their original site plan wasn't working and my land offered the easiest solution. Suddenly Trevor's confidence made perfect sense. In his mind, I was just some homeowner living next to a multi-million-dollar project. He assumed I'd complain, maybe threaten legal action, then eventually get tired and go away. What he never considered was that I had absolutely no intention of playing the role he'd written for me. That evening I called an attorney named Walter Briggs. Walter was in his 70s, half retired, and had spent decades handling property disputes throughout the county. After reviewing the surveys, photographs, and security camera footage I'd started collecting, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Not a big smile, just the kind that appears when someone recognizes an opportunity. You know, he said, most people think property disputes are complicated. They're usually not. The line is either yours or it isn't. And I asked. Walter tapped the survey. The line is yours. That conversation changed everything. I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking strategically. Trevor expected a fight. He expected angry letters. He expected threats. What he didn't expect was patience. 2 days later, I hired a fencing contractor. I didn't order another decorative cedar fence. I ordered something very different. 8-foot chain-link fencing reinforced with steel posts sunk deep into concrete footings. Durable. Legal. Unmistakable. Most importantly, it would sit exactly on the surveyed property boundary. Not 1 inch over. Not 1 inch under. The crew arrived on a Thursday morning. By lunchtime, half the structure was already standing. Around 2 o'clock, I heard shouting from the construction site. Trevor had finally noticed. He stormed across the dirt like a man heading into battle. His face was bright red before he even reached me. What the hell is this? He demanded. I looked at the fence. A fence. Don't get smart with me. Then don't ask obvious questions. For a moment I thought he might actually explode. He pointed toward the steel posts. You're blocking our access road. Interesting, I said. I wasn't aware my property existed to support your project. The workers nearby suddenly became very interested in pretending not to listen. Trevor stepped closer. Take it down. I handed him a copy of the survey. No. He glanced at the paperwork, then at me. This is creating an obstruction. No, I replied. Your trespassing created an inconvenience. That distinction seemed to infuriate him even more. He spent several minutes insisting the fence was unreasonable, selfish, and harmful to the development schedule. Then I showed him something else. The new security cameras. 4 of them, positioned specifically to monitor every foot of the boundary. If anybody touches this fence, I said calmly, The footage goes directly to my attorney and the sheriff's office. The look on his face was priceless. It was the exact moment he realized intimidation wasn't working. Over the next few days, his strategy changed. First came friendliness. Suddenly, Trevor wanted to talk like neighbors. He offered to replace the original fence. Then he offered money. Then more money. One afternoon, he actually knocked on my door carrying coffee and donuts like we were old friends. "Let's figure something out," he said. "Move the fence back a few feet, and everybody wins." I laughed. Funny thing about property lines. They're not really negotiable. A week later, his offer reached $8,000 plus a custom cedar fence after construction ended. 6 months earlier, I probably would have accepted. Not anymore. By then, it wasn't about money. It was about accountability. Trevor had spent weeks treating my property rights as an obstacle to be ignored. Now the obstacle had become permanent. The impact on the project was almost immediate. Without access through my land, delivery routes became far more complicated. Trucks had to enter from the front of the site, navigate tighter turns, and operate on a schedule that slowed everything down. Equipment staging areas had to be reorganized. Certain excavation activities could only happen during limited windows. Delays began piling on top of delays. At first it was a few days, then a couple weeks, then more. The mood at the construction site changed dramatically. Workers who once seemed relaxed now looked stressed. Supervisors held emergency meetings. Engineers appeared with clipboards. Executives started visiting. One morning I noticed 3 people in suits walking around the site, while Trevor followed behind them looking like a student being escorted to the principal's office. The rumors started circulating soon after. According to one subcontractor who lived nearby, the delays were costing Horizon Urban Partners tens of thousands of dollars every single day. Equipment rentals, labor costs, missed deadlines, contract penalties. Everything was snowballing. The irony was almost unbelievable. The company could have rebuilt my original fence for a fraction of what they were losing daily. Instead, one man's ego had transformed a minor problem into a financial disaster. About 6 weeks after the new fence went up, something unusual happened. I arrived home and didn't see Trevor anywhere. Not that day, not the next day either. By the end of the week, his truck was gone. His name had disappeared from the site trailer. A few workers quietly confirmed what everyone already suspected. Corporate had launched an internal investigation. They reviewed permits, survey records, security footage, internal communications, everything. What they discovered apparently wasn't pretty. Trevor had authorized removal of private property without permission. He had approved site access across land the company didn't own. He had ignored warnings from at least one engineer who questioned the decision. In short, he had created the entire mess himself. And now the bill was coming due. A few days later, I received an unexpected knock on my front door. Standing outside was a woman I'd never met before, holding a folder under one arm and wearing a hard hat with the Horizon logo. Unlike Trevor, she wasn't trying to project authority. She looked tired, professional, human. "Mr. Harper?" she asked. "I'm Danielle Morales. I've been assigned as the new project manager." The moment she introduced herself, I knew something significant had happened behind the scenes. What I didn't know yet was that the conversation we were about to have would completely change the ending of this story. Danielle stood on my porch for a moment, looking past me toward the steel fence that had caused so much chaos over the previous 6 weeks. Then she took a slow breath and said something I honestly never expected to hear from anyone connected to that project. "Before we discuss anything else, I want to apologize." There was no corporate spin, no legal language, no attempt to shift blame. Just a simple apology delivered like she actually meant it. After everything that had happened, it caught me completely off guard. I invited her inside, and for the next hour we sat at my kitchen table while she explained what had been going on behind the scenes. The investigation had confirmed what everyone already suspected. Trevor hadn't just made a bad decision. He had ignored procedures, bypassed approvals, and treated a neighboring homeowner's property rights like an inconvenience. Multiple people had raised concerns. He ignored them. When delays started piling up, he doubled down instead of fixing the problem. By the time corporate leadership understood the full situation, the project was already weeks behind schedule and bleeding money every day. Trevor was gone. His career with the company was over. Danielle opened the folder she had brought and slid several documents across the table. "We want to resolve this properly," she said. "Tell me what it would take." It was a strange moment because for weeks I had imagined winning arguments, proving points, and watching the company suffer consequences. But sitting there, face to face with someone who was actually trying to fix the damage, I realized I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted respect. That's all I had wanted from the beginning. So I gave her 3 conditions. First, rebuild my original cedar fence and make it better than the one that was destroyed. Second, plant a full row of evergreen trees along the property line to restore the privacy I'd lost. Third, provide a written agreement guaranteeing that no construction activity, equipment, or personnel would ever enter my property again without permission. Danielle looked down at her notes, nodded once, and said, "Done. No negotiation. No argument. No attempt to shave corners. Just done." For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt the tension begin to leave my shoulders. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. The conflict disappeared. Skilled contractors arrived and built a beautiful cedar fence that was stronger than the original one my family had owned for years. Landscapers planted a line of healthy evergreens that would eventually create a natural privacy wall. Every worker who came near my property treated the boundary with almost comical levels of caution. It was as if my fence had become sacred ground. Sometimes I'd sit on my back porch after work and watch the construction continue. The same project that had once felt like an invading force now looked completely different. Funny how quickly things can change when people start respecting each other. The development itself was eventually completed, but not before finishing nearly 4 months behind schedule. From what I later heard through local gossip, Horizon spent a fortune dealing with the fallout. Insurance claims, legal reviews, contract disputes, delays. The company even pursued action to recover some of the losses connected to the decisions that had triggered the disaster in the first place. Meanwhile, life on my side of the fence returned to normal. The grass recovered. The trees grew taller every season. The new fence weathered beautifully. And every now and then Danielle would stop by while inspecting the property, usually asking how the evergreens were doing or whether I had any concerns. We were never close friends, but we developed something far more valuable than that. Mutual respect. Looking back now, the thing that stays with me isn't the anger I felt when I discovered my fence missing. It isn't even the satisfaction of watching a giant construction project grind to a halt because somebody thought they could ignore a property line. It's the lesson underneath all of it. A lot of people assume power belongs to whoever has the biggest budget, the most lawyers, or the tallest building. But sometimes power is much simpler than that. Sometimes it's knowing exactly where your boundary is and refusing to let anyone convince you it doesn't matter. Trevor thought my fence was just a pile of wood standing in the way of progress. What he failed to understand was that the fence represented something much bigger. Respect, ownership, accountability. Once those things are removed, people notice. And once people start pushing back, even very expensive mistakes can become impossible to ignore. Today, when I look out my kitchen window, I can see the finished apartment building rising behind those evergreens. Families live there now. Shops are open. Life goes on. Most residents probably have no idea that a 6-foot strip of land and one demolished fence once helped derail the entire project. Sometimes I wonder what side people would take if they knew the full story. Would they say I should have accepted the money and moved on? Would they argue I was stubborn for refusing every offer? Or would they believe that some lines, once crossed, deserve consequences no matter how inconvenient those consequences become? That's a question I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on. If you were in my position, would you have taken the money and moved the fence, or would you have stood your ground exactly where the property line said you could? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about neighbor disputes, property battles, and ordinary people standing up for themselves, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who'd have an opinion on who was really right and who was really wrong.